Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.
We have two sons, and I know the youngest one shared that, he wanted even to get eye surgery because he was tired of people laughing at him about his eyes. But, we just persevered. I think the big thing is that we're always looked upon as the perpetual foreigner. I know that I think every Asian person, Pacific Islander, that is always asked, where are you from? Your English is so good that, they're wounded by that. I don't think people understand the hurt that we experience whenever we're asked that.
I'm Sarah Fensky. This is St. Louis on the Air. Last week's deadly attacks in Atlanta were a galvanizing moment for Asian Americans across the U.S., and the community here in St. Louis is no different. Asian Americans here are speaking out about a rise in hate and targeted violence. And two members of the community are here today to share their concerns and also their hopes for this moment. Ed Hsu is a St. Louis native, a retired human resources professional, and also the author of the historical novel Chinese Brothers, American Sons. He's also a former Democratic candidate for the Missouri House. Ed Hsu, welcome.
Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And we're also joined today by Shane Propisel. He's the Chief Operating Officer of STJ Group Holdings. That runs businesses including restaurants The King and I and Chow Bon, and also Global Foods Market, J International, and more. He's also a board member of the Asian American Chamber of Commerce. So, Shane, welcome.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me on.
So, Shane, there have been a mind-numbing tally of mass shootings in the U.S. in recent years. Why did the one in Atlanta on March 16th hit so hard for you?
I think we as a community, for the past couple years have really seen an uptick in verbal assaults that leads to physical assaults from some of the highest elected officials in the country. And we've been kind of, dealing with this silently as a community, trying to keep our heads down, trying to just go about our day. But I think the culmination of something like a mass shooting in Atlanta that happened, I think finally just hit all of us, whether, we were just trying to, go about our days and work at our businesses, that we're not immune to this type of violence, and I think that it just really brought to a head the type of xenophobia and racism that our community's been dealing with for quite some time now.
Ed, I'm curious to hear about you. Had you also noticed that rise in xenophobia and anti-Asian American racism?
Well, yes, I know even recently there was a state representative from Branson who used the term Chinese virus. So, we certainly think that's kind of a dog whistle for racism and things we shouldn't be a part of. What I really think we ought to do also with the Asian hate is that's maybe part of a larger focus that we should be talking about is against hatred, speaking up against all hatred and social injustice. But yes, we certainly in St. Louis feel the effects of what's happening in Atlanta and all through the country. I know I have a lot of friends on the East and West Coast, and people there are even afraid to go out, and they've even formed, I guess, groups to protect especially the elderly.
I know statistics show that attacks are up. It's interesting. Overall hate crimes decreased by 7% in 16 major U.S. cities in 2020. At the same time, anti-Asian hate crime reports increased 149%. And they did begin to spike in March and April when COVID-19 began its spread. Shane, when you're talking about the rhetoric, do you tie that to people attempting to make this the Chinese flu and these kind of comments that Ed mentioned just now coming from one of our own state representatives?
Definitely, and Sarah, even with those figures, I know that it's been documented that attacks and instances of xenophobia have increased, but I would even argue that those are probably underreported. Whether sometimes the victims don't speak English or they don't feel comfortable going to the authorities. I'm almost positive that those figures are probably worse than what is being reported. But to your point, back when the pandemic started, obviously with the news coverage, I think there was a responsible way to talk about the origins of the virus and best public health practices. But I think a segment of our elected leadership, unfortunately, starting at the very top, decided to make this a racially based campaign to blame it on one group of people, and that's had far-reaching consequences for Asian Americans all around the country.
Shane, I think you make a good point about the numbers of what's truly happening on the ground are likely higher, that this is being underreported. And I know some community members have met now with St. Louis County Police Chief Mary Barton to raise awareness about these attacks. Do you think law enforcement has an understanding that these kind of things aren't just happening in isolation, that this is part of a scary trend? Shane, what's your sense of that?
No, I think it's definitely systemic, and hopefully it doesn't rise to the level of a physical attack. Whether it's we've seen these physical attacks in cities like New York and Atlanta, to something as horrendous as a mass shooting in Atlanta. But even what I would say, kind of the soft racism, the looks, the comments, things that most folks are just saying, you know what, they're just ignorant, they're uninformed, and go about the day. It definitely plays into the larger climate of folks feel empowered to kind of say these comments because they think it's no big deal. But all these things lead together to culminate into someone partaking in an act of violence against a person.
I want to talk a bit about both of your experiences, particularly as they relate to growing up in St. Louis. This can be, or can feel like sometimes, such a black and white city, and that's the main division here. And then for the Asian American community, that exists a bit outside that. Ed, I know your mother was born in St. Louis's Hop Alley. This was the city's old Chinatown. It's where Busch Stadium is today. What did she tell you about her experience growing up in St. Louis all those years ago?
Well, first I must say that my dad was always working, so I spent more time with my mother. So, but I know early on she told us that this is the white man's world, and then we should also just try to fit in when we can. I know, for example, in high school, I was the only Asian in my high school, and at times that was a bit lonely, but I had sports to carry me through. But I can say some things that happened. For example, we have two sons, and I know the youngest one shared that he wanted even to get eye surgery because he was tired of people laughing at him about his eyes. So those things we experienced. But we just persevered. I think the big thing is that we're always looked upon as the perpetual foreigner. And I know that I think every Asian person, Pacific Islander, that is always asked, "Where are you from? Your English is so good," that they're wounded by that. I don't think people understand the hurt that we experience whenever we're asked that.
Yeah, and Ed, I mean, you grew up here. Your mother also grew up here. Is that a question that you found yourself asked here in St. Louis?
Oh, definitely. That if I had a nickel for that question, I've even been asked that at my church a couple times. So, it's constantly there.
That's got to be such a frustrating experience. Shane, I know your parents are from Thailand, but you also grew up here. Have you had that same experience?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. You know, my parents are immigrants, and me and my siblings are first generation Americans, and I can definitely speak to the experiences that Ed was talking about. Kind of sometimes it wasn't even out of malice, just mostly out of ignorance. Growing up in West County in the late '80s, early '90s, I was oftentimes probably one of the few Asian Americans in my class. But I am heartened, not just with the Asian community growing here in St. Louis, but also making ourselves more visible and more outspoken about the issues that are both important to us and affect us from a day-to-day basis. And I just feel very privileged that, my parents who are immigrants have equipped me and my siblings to speak for ourselves and speak on behalf of other Asians who perhaps, don't feel comfortable or don't have the mastery of the language or just don't have avenues to bring up our issues. So, my observation was when I graduated high school, I was probably one of a couple dozen Asian Americans, and I went to my little cousin's high school graduation, a year or two ago, and it was one of the most diverse graduating classes I've seen, both with African Americans, Asian Americans, and so I think things are slowly changing, but even with kind of the demographic changes, we're still, to Ed's point, still very othered. Just seeing how our community seems to be very vulnerable.
Ed, you wrote a recent op-ed for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. I thought this was a really powerful piece of writing. Just one line from it that really stuck out. You wrote, "Sweeping generalizations of Asian Americans as the privileged and successful spit in the face of the inequalities that many Asian Americans face daily." Can you unpack that a little bit for us? You had some just interesting examples there in your op-ed about what you were talking about.
Well, I guess what I think is that our world kind of minimizes us, and we kind of minimize ourselves. I've often been asked, "Don't you think you've been helped by being Chinese?" And because I guess they're thinking that the stereotype is good education, family background, and people look at that and they'll want to hire you, for example. But I know that growing up in St. Louis, being spit at a couple times, during the Vietnam War, and denied employment and housing, and stopped 7 times for traffic violations, never been given a warning. So
they just go straight to the ticket.
Right. So,
yeah.
But the stereotype is that we're successful, and people don't understand that we're not a monolithic group of people. There are, East Asian, South Asian, Southeast Asian. Not everybody is a doctor, an engineer, and I think I read a statistic one time that maybe not now after the pandemic, unfortunately, but there are as many Asian servers as there are doctors. There are a lot of people who aren't doing well, and so we need to do a better job.
Do you get mad when you hear then people talk about Asians as the quote-unquote model minority, that you guys are doing it right, so why can't everybody just do what you've done?
Well, that's really a myth, because I think that's used as a wedge to tell other minorities, if Asians can do it, you can do it. So I really don't like that term at all, and that definitely is a myth.
Shane, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. Is that something that you've had to think about and grapple with?
Yeah, definitely. I think there is this perception of I think a lot of it is an economic insecurity that we're Asian Americans are coming in and taking positions from other groups of people. But what I have been heartened about, and I think it's always existed, but it's really been highlighted, I believe, since the George Floyd murder last summer, is that Asian Americans can't exist in a vacuum. I think that is sometimes it's easy to be about your own community where you can speak the language, but all of our struggles are intertwined with other people of color around the country, and that our struggles, are not, they're unique, but they're not, they're not also, other groups have had to encounter this as well. So I believe the activism and the solidarity that other groups have shown us and we've shown them has been really heartening, and I think it hopefully will propel the conversation forward. Ever since Atlanta happened, you've seen folks who may have been sitting on the sidelines prior felt the need to speak up and speak out, and I hope that trend continues.
Ed, do you feel that as well, that this isn't something where you're saying the racism against Asians is more or worse than against, say, Black people or other minorities? It's a thing of all standing together, of saying we're all victims of these same forces here.
Oh, definitely. I'm hoping that maybe that the politicians are getting involved in the media, that perhaps this is a watershed in American history, so that we can all become a little more united. And like I said, I think earlier about fighting social injustice. So again, we should be speaking up for all hatred, and so I'm hoping this will continue. I know, for example, Vigil Saturday night, and there's a public forum I think tonight. So people are getting interested, and I hope it continues.
We're talking today to Ed Hsu. He's a St. Louis native. He's a retired human resources professional. He's also the author of the novel Chinese Brothers, American Sons. We're also joined by Shane Propisel. He's the chief operating officer of STJ Group Holdings that owns many of your favorite restaurants. That includes one of my favorites, Chow Bon, as well as J International and a number of other groceries and markets. And Ed, you mentioned a vigil that you had attended there. I understand this vigil here in the St. Louis area got a really good turnout. What was that like being at that?
Well, yes, that was. I wasn't sure of how many people were going to be there, and I was pleased to see a big turnout of Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, and white people, and I was glad to see maybe a dozen or so of my friends that I was able to get to come, and the speakers there were all very inspiring, and again, it's the vigil was to feel the sadness and the heartache for those 8 people who were killed, but also to show that we must continue to work together and speak out, document, and it was very good. People from the FBI were there, the prosecuting attorney's office. Someone from Sam Page's office was there. So I think this is the start. We need good intentions are a start. We need to continue.
Shane, it sounds like the powers that be are taking this seriously. Is that your sense of things too, as somebody who's active with the business community?
I think so. It was kind of unfortunate timing that the Asian American Chamber of Commerce, we had been working on a statement well before the incident in Atlanta, and it just happened to be released on the same week of the shooting. And so I think we're glad that we got the statement out there. And to Ed's point, I think folks with the power and opportunity to actually change things are taking note. You saw the president, the vice president fly down to Atlanta to meet with local Asian leaders there and the victims' families. So I think that it is a true inflection point, and it's up to not just Asian Americans, but Americans of all backgrounds to make sure that we tackle the systemic issues that caused this in the first place.
And Shane, I want to mention something that's also happening here on the ground in St. Louis. You launched an initiative at Chow Bon. It's called Dining Out to Stop AAPI Hate. And first, for listeners who don't know that acronym, what is AAPI?
It's the term for Asian American and Pacific Islanders, so kind of the umbrella term for people from Asia and the Pacific Rim.
Okay. So this dining out to stop AAPI hate, how is this going to work?
So through the month of April, every Tuesday, all sales, 10% of sales will go to support 2 organizations. We picked one with a national focus called #StopAAPIHate. That organization is working on reporting Asian hate crimes across the country and giving the authorities this information so that they can hopefully act on it. And the other organization is a little bit more focus on the city of Atlanta. It's an organization called Asian Americans Advancing Justice, and they are a legal organization working on legislation and things that we can do through the criminal justice system to help address violence against Asian Americans.
Okay. So, Shane, in addition to dining out on a Tuesday and participating in this initiative, in our final 30 seconds here, what's the number one thing people can do if they themselves are not part of this community but want to be a good ally right now?
I would just say, check in on your friends and colleagues. I know for me this week, it's, everyone's kind of had to keep a brave face, but, a whole lot of our community members are grieving and are trying to process this through different ways. But also, if you have access and privilege, please contact your elected officials and say, this is an issue that's important to me. This is happening to my fellow citizens, and I'd like to see some concrete steps being taken to address it.
Shane Propisal, I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sarah.
And Ed Hsu, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And Chow Bond's program runs every Tuesday through April 27th. We encourage you to participate in that. Also, check out the hashtag StopAAPIHate. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri, St. Louis.
Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.